Alrighty, y'all, welcome back to another tutorial, and in this endgame lesson, I am going to show you how to win with a queen and a king against the pawn. Now, if you guys are saying a pawn, I could probably figure this out. It's basically queen versus pawn, but believe it or not, this is actually kind of a tricky situation because this pawn is one square away from queening, and not only queening, but queening with check on the white king. Now, if you don't know the technique, and whenever I was first starting out, I got into this situation a lot, I would pretty much just try to check the king, the black king, over and over again, and it eventually got in a position where it was able to hide around the pawn, and the pawn could promote, and I would either have to just sacrifice my queen, or it would be a draw in some other kind of way. So I'll show you guys the proper technique on not only how to draw, but how to actually win this endgame. Now, before I do, I just want to point out what the objective is going to be, because once you know this idea, it's kind of just repeating this pattern over and over again. So the most important concept in this tutorial is this. What we are going to do is we, as white, are going to force black in front of their pawn. Now we're going to do this so this pawn obviously can't promote, and additionally, once they are in front of their pawn, we can slowly march our king closer and closer and closer. Because with any queen and king endgame, you obviously need both pieces in order to checkmate. So that is essentially our entire goal until we get to the few last couple of moves. But that's essentially how you win this endgame. So, okay, let's see how it's done. So with my queen, white to move, obviously if it's black to move, then they would queen, check, and it would be a draw. But with the white to move, what we want to do is we first want to check the king on f4. So, of course, if this king starts, running away, I just want to point out the obvious. If this king starts running away, then we can just go ahead and capture this pawn. But let's say that the king just goes to e1, where they aren't just completely leaving the action, but they want to stay close enough to their pawn. So the first thing we need to do is just threaten to win this pawn by queen to g3, check on the king, and threaten to win the pawn. So obviously what this king is going to do is it's not, going to let that happen. It's going to go to f1, hoping that we capturing king captures and it's a draw. However, even though we're threatening to capture the pawn, we don't want to capture it just yet. We don't want to settle for a draw. So instead, we're going to go f3, check. Now, of course, if the king doesn't want to lose the pawn, then it can't go this way. So it's going to retreat. Or I don't want to say retreat, it's going to hide on g1. So this is the key position that we're always going to be aiming for in this endgame. Whenever this king is blocking the promotion square from the pawn, then we essentially win a tempo. So what we can do now is march our king one step closer to the promised land. So now, black to move, don't have many options. Let's just say they go king to h2. Looking for this little maneuver. Well, we obviously don't want to allow that on the next move, or else it's of course going to be a draw. So instead, what we can do is just play queen to f2. Now, if you look, you'll notice that what this does is it prevents this pawn from promoting because it is now pinned to the king. Pretty awesome maneuver. So now, of course, the king doesn't have too many options. They don't want to start running away. So let's say king to h1. And now we go queen to h4, same technique, keep checking the king until we force it into this position right here. So now, of course, the king doesn't really have any choice, it's in check. It obviously can't go to any of these squares, so king g1. And now, look at where we're at. The king is now protecting the pawn's promotion square, and we can now move our king one step closer, g6. And yes, I am going to go through all of these just to cement this in your head. But let's say king f1, queen f4, check. Of course, we want to keep the pressure on the king. The king can even try to go to e2 if we want. Then let's just say queen g3, threatening to, if the king doesn't come back, then we just, capture the pawn. And that's another winning endgame. So what the king is going to do is, of course, go back to f1, queen f3, and now king has to go back to g1, And after this position, we just keep marching our king forward. So let's say that black goes to h2. Now at this point, we're gonna kind of deviate from our plan because our king is now close enough where we don't just want to keep moving closer and closer. We can actually think about delivering the checkmate instead. So before, when we were trying to just move our king close as possible, we would move our queen to f2, essentially pinning this pawn to the king, and then move our king closer. But now what we can do is, instead of that, we can just take our king and move to h4. So now we're pretty much taking away a lot of space, and black finally gets their opportunity to say, wow, now I can get that queen that I wanted so desperately. However, white to move, this is actually checkmate. So sure, we gave him the queen, but we got the game, so mission accomplished. So I'm just gonna play this one last time just to point out that in this endgame, queen versus pawn, what we want to do is we pretty much want to threaten to capture the pawn, and when the king moves back, we essentially just push it in front of the pawn, and every time we essentially force it in front of the pawn, we cause them to lose a tempo, allowing our white king to move one step closer, and eventually when our king gets close enough, then we can essentially say, you know what, you can have your queen because this king is now able to protect our queen when we deliver the checkmate. So it seems like a confusing endgame, and even if we go like way back to the beginning, we see things like stockfish mate in 17, mate in 20, and if you're ever like, how can a human possibly calculate this like 17 moves ahead? Well, you don't really need to calculate every single move. You just need to remember this one general concept, and then you can, start thinking like a grandmaster. So for now, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.